Two federal judges this morning blocking President Trump's revised travel ban, both citing words the president used while on the campaign trail in their decision that involves these 6 Muslim-majority countries. They say those words amounted to religious discrimination, therefore blocking this ban. The president blasting this ruling by the Hawaii federal judge overnight, calling it unprecedented judicial overreach, vowing to fight it all the way up to the Supreme Court. Here to discuss that and more, Congresswoman from Florida, former DNC Chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Congresswoman, it is nice to have you. Let me just get your reaction because, you know, a number of legal analysts, including Alan Dershowitz, R. Jeffrey Toobin, say that's a tough argument in court, that what the president said before he was president would have weight on this decision legally. How do you see it?
Well, I think you apply the adage, if it looks like a Muslim ban, walks like a Muslim ban, talks like a Muslim ban, then it's probably a Muslim ban. I mean, it would be one thing if the president and his administration had actually targeted countries that had a propensity to be sending us immigrants or refugees that were committing acts of terrorism on our soil. Only those acts of terrorism that we've experienced have actually been homegrown, unfortunately have been either American citizens or naturalized American citizens. And, you know, there is no basis for specifically targeting these countries. These are countries that have 90 to 99.8% Muslim population, and the president also repeatedly said and also asked his advisors, like Rudy Giuliani, to help him craft a ban on Muslims that would pass constitutional muster. This one most likely doesn't.
So I hear your point that, say, the countries where the 9/11 hijackers are from, those 4 countries, UAE, Lebanon, Saudi, and Lebanon and Egypt not included here. But here's the push, right? In 2015, not that long ago, DNI Clapper in testimony said, I don't put it past the likes of ISIL to infiltrate other operatives among these refugees. That's a huge concern of ours. And then you had FBI Director Comey that same year come out and say, I can't sit here and I can't say with absolute assurance there is no risk associated. This is a temporary pause, a 90-day pause that the administration is asking for. Do you see any need for improvement to the current system?
We have a 2-year vetting process that is extremely rigorous for reviewing refugees that ask to come into our country to seek refuge. So we already have a very significant vetting process, extreme, as the president likes to use. You know, I'm okay with a temporary halt in immigration or even admission of some refugees from countries that we actually have real concern about. The only concern that the president seems to have about these countries is that they are overwhelmingly majority Muslim, and that's a religious test.
So you'd be comfortable with Congresswoman Saudi Arabia, for example? You'd be comfortable with that pause from Saudi Arabia, a key ally of this country in the region?
What I'd be comfortable with is that if there is a true analysis of the risk from countries that we are concerned about, that have had immigrants come to this country that have committed acts of terrorism. The recent acts of terrorism that we've had have virtually all been from people who were either naturalized here or were natural-born American citizens. And so you know, we're gonna see this go up through the courts, maybe, because if you remember, the president pulled his last punch and didn't send it through the courts because I think his analysts surmised that it wouldn't pass constitutional muster, and I think this is likely going to suffer the same fate.
We'll see. I mean, this one, even though the president called it just watered down last night, this one is significantly different than the original one. Let me get your take on health care before I lose you.
It's got a different costume, but it's the same thing.
Well, they've taken out a lot of things like legal permanent residents, green card holders, Iraq is not included. But I want to get your take because you're on the budget committee. You guys are going to sit down. You're going to mark up this bill today on health care. I know you don't like it, right? And I know you are probably reveling in the fact that 19 Republicans in the House don't want to sign this thing, and if you get 21, they're going to lose it. But where will you work with Republicans on this one? Where will you give? Or is the Democrats' play here just to be obstructionist?
Well, we're happy, as we've said for many years, to work with Republicans on the fixes that are necessary for the Affordable Care Act. But what they're doing, well, I want to make sure that we address the issue of the counties and states that only have very limited choice when it comes to policies. We don't need to tear out the entire Affordable Care Act to do that. We need to sit down and address the problem. But what this bill does is it takes away health care from 14 million people in the next year and 24 million over 10 years. What it does is that it not only leaves people uninsured, it leaves them underinsured, Poppy. What's not been talked about as much is that it eliminates the significant coverage benefits that are required in Affordable Care Act policies that would no longer be required under this bill. And so many people would have, even if they had insurance, not have enough coverage to actually make sure that they could get their health care needs addressed.
I would say that has been covered a lot in detail, at least on this network. Chris just went through it point by point with the senator. Before you go, you know, in your home state of Florida, premiums this year on the Silver Plan going up 19%. Last year they went up 9.5%. You know these families, they write to you, they call you, they say we can't afford this. Where was the urgency when you thought?
No, actually, that's not what they're saying in my home state.
You've had no constituent say this is too expensive.
Look, people vote with their feet. And what that means is that when something is too expensive, they walk away. We have the most signups for the Affordable Care Act in the entire country in the state of Florida. And you also would have the most people lose coverage under the Republican pay more for less plan. Trumpcare would be a disaster for my state and disproportionately hurt the elderly, because there are the elderly who would have astronomical increases in their health care costs.
It's an important point.
And unacceptable.
It's an important point on Florida. You have had some of the big providers, insurance companies pulling out, but just really you haven't heard from
we
one.
Still have choice.
You haven't heard from any constituents who say this is getting too expensive?
There are people who always complain that health care is too expensive, but we've had the lowest rate of growth in health care costs in 50 years, Poppy. We had much higher rates of increase before the Affordable Care Act. There's no denying that. And, of course, we always want to get a handle on health care costs. What we don't need to do in order to achieve that is take health care away from millions and millions of people and pile increases in costs on the elderly, the sick, and the disabled to give a massive tax break to the wealthiest 400 Americans in this country. That's what this bill does. This is a massive tax break for the wealthy disguised as a health care bill.
Congresswoman, we appreciate you joining us. You have a busy day ahead.